All right, so our last review of the day is going to be between Nick and Sage. They're going to be doing a review for Resident Evil Requiem. Cue this up there, Sage. What you got for us? Why are these residents so evil, and why are they evil for the ninth time? What's going on?
Like, this game is a lot of things, but I
Mhm.
think, to put it as concisely as possible, it is truly a victory lap for Koshi Nakanishi,
Mhm.
who basically revived what felt like a dead franchise after 6. He was the director on Resident Evil 7. They brought him in from the Revelations spinoff, and
Mhm.
then they brought him in on that main series, and then he's kind of been spearheading the whole franchise, and he's been the guiding hand on all of this. And this game feels like this confident victory lap. It feels like a thank you in a
Mhm.
lot of ways, and it also, in some ways, it feels like a, hey, we know we got a little crazy there. We spent some time away reminding you of what you liked about this in the first place, and now we're ready to move forward. And
Mhm.
I think one of the most impressive things about this game is it does feel like, instead of just sort of going off in a little corner and doing its own thing, which I think 7 and 8 are great in that they do
Mhm.
that, but this feels like a continuation of the broad, larger scope of it as a series. And I don't think there's ever been a Resident Evil game that is as self-aware of the identity, or multitudes of
Mhm.
identities, that this franchise has within its, like, broad, complete scope.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. This just playing this game, seeing all the love for games like Resident Evil 7 since that basically revived the franchise, seeing the gameplay of like Resident Evil 2 and 3 and 4 remake, which 4 I just finished playing for the first time
Mm.
a week before this came out. This is kind of like a love letter to all of the things that people love about Resident Evil, even down to like how they split the gameplay in this between the two protagonists.
And that's an amazing thing too. I want to pick back off what you just said, because another one of the just the best things about this is the pacing. I think
Mhm.
they do such a good job of having this slow, tense, very horror intensive experience, and then as that crescendos, you swap and you
Mhm.
get this relief of tension in the form of that RE4 style gameplay, and it works so well for that build up and release that you can get with just pure horror. But
Mhm.
having this dynamic with both styles is, I never really imagined they would pull something like that off, because they kind of tried this with 6, which
Mhm.
most people do not like.
Yeah,
And this,
6
in
is
a lot of
kind of a
ways,
mess of a game.
it really is. And in a lot of ways, this feels like what I think 6 was like should have been.
Mhm.
Mhm. And with this game, so it's the ninth in the series there. So you're split between Grace and Leon, it seems like, in this game. And you said it's pretty much 50-50, but you play a little bit more Grace in the front end and a little bit more
Mhm.
Leon in the back end. Is
Yeah, so that the pacing in the first half, you have these pretty long sequences of grace, and then they're punctuated with these high tension action sequences
Mhm.
that are short but really satisfying bursts. And then the second half, we kind of do the opposite, where we have
Mhm.
these big bursts of action. And I also think it kind of achieves a new tone and style in a certain portion, which I won't even say where the location of it is. But
Mhm.
there's a section of the game that, it more than any other feeling, it's like melancholic, which I don't
Mhm.
know if I've ever quite had that feeling in a big area of a Resident Evil game before.
Mhm. It's kind of a melancholic feeling that you get in small moments in the Resident Evil games, especially I think in the RE2 remake, you get the moment with Kendo and his daughter,
Mm.
and even in 4, you get a little bit more of that between the dynamic between Leon and Luis, but it's not as punctuated as well as it is here. And I think a lot of that is the casting of this, especially with Grace, who's played by Angela Santalbano, who
Mm-hmm.
is incredible in this. And there was a moment, especially early in the game, because her character has a tragic backstory. I was almost thinking it was like, damn, did they just kill the actress's mom in the booth? Because it is such a gut-wrenching performance at times.
No, I mean you're totally right. She's really incredible, and there's some debate about this between people, but 7, when it pulled back and kind of was like, let's kind of step away from the craziness and come down to maybe a character that's a little more down to earth. The Ethan character ends up being, I think, a really good avatar, and they give him a more personality in 8, but he does feel very much built to be an avatar. He does not have like overly emotional reactions to things. Here, this is like a very well-rounded, very fully realized character, and I genuinely think it is the most human a character has ever felt across this entire franchise, and not just the mainline games. I mean, we're talking like all 30 spin-offs, remakes, like what have you.
And so with this game, who's the big villain in this game? There.
So the one that's kind of not spoiling anything to talk about because he's in all the trailers is this character Victor Gideon, who this is where the goofy part of Resident Evil comes in, because he literally is dressed like a giant snake man. He's got
he's got like a big ass he's got a big ass snakeskin coat, which and he has like the hallmarks of like a kind of the classic or more goofy side villains in Resident Evil games. He reminded me a lot of I can't remember the character's name, but he was like the villain in the first act of Resident Evil 5. He reminded me a lot in his performance in that.
I could totally see it. I forget his name too, but I can 100% see that. And I think it works really well because, again, it's like you almost get the tone of every type of Resident Evil in this. That's a hilarious image. And he's also got a ring that's a snake eye on it, which is just great. But he's an old Umbrella researcher. He was part of like the original crew, right?
Yeah, he was like one of the original members of the team researching the T virus and its subsequent various mutations.
It's interesting because we've sort of done this thing before. Like 5 a little bit had this feeling where it's like, okay, we're doing a legacy sequel that kind of says goodbye to but I think this game manages to take, more of a direct and a more interesting route by having it be sort of Umbrella as a whole and less a specific person left over. There is that too, but it really feels like it's dealing with the broader consequences of just the world. Like you think what happens in Raccoon City happens across like 10 games if you count all the spinoffs and stuff, right? And then that irrevocably changes like the trajectory of history within this universe forever. And I think that's something that maybe you don't think about as much in most of the Resident Evil games because they're fun action romps or they're standalone things. But this really gives you, I think, this really nice sense of looking back and seeing the progression of like an alternate sci-fi history.
Yeah. You mentioned, this game kind of taking place over the course of time. We see a character return in Leon. Now he looks older.
Yeah, Leon's, I think in the game he's 51 by the time the events of this game.
Never worked better.
For a guy who is on death's door, he looks fantastic.
How well do you think this game handles, having a classic character return? And, how well do you think it handles that in terms of not just being nostalgia bait or anything like that?
I think it does.
It handles it perfectly because Leon's character arc in this, it kind of feels like a perfect continuation of his arc in both the RE2 and 4 remakes, because so much of like his character's like feeling of failure and that so many people died in Raccoon City that he couldn't do a thing about it. And so much of, and that has kind of fueled his actions throughout the games where he is the lead in, especially in this, where he finally has a chance.
And I think you just hit the nail on the head there. And I think even more broadly, with both characters to some degree, it's a game that is really focused on, I think, the primary theme of survivor's guilt.
Nice. And with the character Grace, and because she was introduced in what, Resident Evil, was it 7 or 8?
Yeah,
no, she's a new character.
So Grace is a brand new character.
Oh, she's a brand new.
Yeah, Grace is a brand new character, but her mother is Alyssa Ashcroft, who was one of the playable characters in 2003's Resident Evil Outbreak. And
Ah,
that's another game that takes place over during the original Raccoon City outbreak.
And
gotcha.
that she was kind of felt like the most popular character because that was
Mhm.
it was like an online multiplayer game on the PS2, like when we were just really starting to figure that stuff out. And there's little hints of her too in other games. In 7, you can find one of her articles. She's a journalist. It's very, in the background lore, it's sort of presented as she had a lot of the kind of actual physical evidence that helped take down the Umbrella Corporation, which you sort of get mostly in like the pro kind of opening sequence of 4. But Alyssa had a lot to do with that. And so, again, as a game that's revisiting all this stuff from the past and kind of the legacy that Umbrella has left on the world, and the legacy of characters like Leon, having her daughter be the other major character, I think that's a genius move to pull things together.
And she's an FBI agent.
And
Correct.
she's an analyst too, and I think that's very
Mhm.
important. She's not like a field agent going out and like dealing with cases and like chasing people around with a gun. Like
Right.
she's a desk jockey basically, and that allows the fear in her portions of the game to be so much more palpable.
And I saw some people was like, man, why is she so scared? She's an FBI agent. People had to remember it's like she's just a data analyst. She's not like
Yeah,
you said, a field agent through there. It's like, why is she
that's
so bad
people
with a
just
gun?
not paying attention.
Um, with that there. And you guys already kind of touched on this a little briefly of just like the gameplay differences. So with more
Mhm,
grace, it's more of a kind of traditional horror game,
mhm,
kind of hide and kind of seek type thing where you're crouching, you're running away from the. I mean, you do have weapons with Grace,
mhm,
And
but not.
slowly you start to get more resources as her sections go, and so you have that same sort of progression that you do in like Resident Evil 1. And in fact, her first kind of big level in the game feels like a very cool tribute to Resident
mhm,
Evil 1.
Mm. And then Leon portion, so that is very much more heavy kind of action
mhm.
focus there. What kind of changed gameplay wise there when playing Leon as opposed to maybe playing them other games there? What did that
Well,
kind of
I
remind you
think
of?
the best way that I would describe it is you play Resident Evil 4 remake, right? You get
Mhm,
this sort of John Wick badass that Leon is. Here, I think the biggest key is that his movement speed is slower. You can sort of
mhm.
feel the age of the character and how he moves, but instead of it making him less badass, it makes him more like a tank, just sort
Uh-huh.
of
Yeah,
slowly rolling through everything.
it's that classic thing of be wary of an old man in a world where men die young.
Yeah.
Totally.
And stuff with the enemy types in here. Can you describe some of those of like
So
seems like the zombies are way different here
yeah,
than
so
what
There's
they've been.
so
some
the
inspiration
the
for this
zombie
too.
yeah, so the zombies in this, they are kind of like there's a hint in like this short film that came out prior to this that was directed by I can't remember the guy's name.
It's the
Was
guy
it
that
Johan?
directed War of the Worlds, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was that guy where it is you're following a character who's played by Micah Monroe in like the events of the Raccoon City outbreak, and they established that the zombies they keep like some of their personality in it.
Mm.
And you see that in, different enemy types where you'll have this like chef that is stalking Grace throughout her section that is like, wielding this like machete or this like butcher's knife where you have to hide and seek from him. You'll see like these two characters that are like lounge singers in one section of it that are creepy as hell.
They do these
Yeah.
like sonic blast attacks if you
Mhm,
get too close. That's again, and even having certain zombies have different special ways of attacking you is really great.
mhm.
There's even a great bit too where there's one that is just really angry at any loud noise. So if you throw a glass bottle into a different zombie, he will attack that other zombie for you.
Oh yeah, yeah. Grace's section it has I think the most replayability in how you can approach it, and I think all of the Resident Evil games really are kind of replayable in how you can approach different situations.
Yeah. I saw people talking about Madonna zombie right here.
Yeah, that
That's
that
one of the
Madonna zombie
singers.
scared the fuck out of me.
Yeah. But she kind of bad though, Loki. I don't know. I was like, hey, she kind of bad. Yeah, so you had that. So yeah, that's kind of a cool touch there with the zombies get to keep their personalities there.
And it's one of a few things in the game, and I love to see this because anytime that a because Resident Evil is like the classic survival horror, right?
Mhm.
Like other than Sweet Home and Alone in the Dark, nothing else comes before this, right? This really created a horror renaissance on the PS2, and then we're now in like a new video game horror renaissance because of Resident Evil 7. And it's really cool to see. Alan Wake 2 took a whole bunch of stuff from Resident Evil, like pretty much outright the gameplay structure of 2 Remake. This has taken a few things back forward, and I love to see that back and forth inspiration between 2 series that are both doing what they're doing really well. And the sort of them having these twitches of their personality, it feels very similar to the Taken and Alan Wake 2. But on top of that, you also have certain sort of light affecting sequences that are very much about how you can deal with light to deal with enemies coming after you, and even to the point of like the title cards at the beginning of each sequence look exactly the same as Alan Wake 2, and I swear it had the same sound effect when they appeared on screen even.
Nice. Yeah. Could you see kind of like a modern kind of them taken from other games? Could you see that as well, Nick? There in the Resident Evil game,
Yeah,
in this new one.
yeah. What horror games that I've played, like a little bit of Alan Wake, there is a lot of back and forth inspiration, and really a lot of inspiration from previous Resident Evil games, at least the ones that I've played. Like even the gameplay structure coming from Resident Evil's like 7 and 8, the kind of action focused in Leon's section from 4 through 6. Even a lot of the settings and architecture, they feel like a very honest love letter to the original era of Resident Evil, and even something that I wish was kind of kept from the trailer, because you return to Raccoon City in this game in the aftermath of the bomb dropping.
Yep.
Yeah. What difficult did you guys play this on?
I just did normal to start with.
I'm a little bitch, so I played on casual.
Okay. Yeah, casual there. How difficult, if you do put it on, because you guys have played a lot of Resident Evil games, if you do put it on a more difficult level, how difficult does it get if you go more?
So I tried a little bit on Insanity, which you unlock once you beat the game, and it's pretty tough. Like there's sort of a variant enemy in the very original Resident Evil called Crimson Heads, and they sort of bring that concept back here. It's a little different, but if you've played the game once, you go back through a second time, you hit it up to Insanity, those things are showing up in the tutorial instead of 4 hours into the game. So it can make a pretty big difference, honestly. The amount of hits that you can take, it can be pretty brutal. Now, to be fair, if you're playing on Insanity, you've beaten the game once, you might have enough like special points to get like an infinite ammo gun, and then it sort of trivializes that difficulty a little bit. But if you're doing it earnestly without using that stuff, it can make it pretty difficult. And to be honest, I think I only died like once, maybe twice in the game. And it was actually never during the grace part. It was during some of the action heavy parts with Leon later that happened.
Okay. Interesting. So, and then I think we talked about this a little bit of, if you've never really played the Resident Evil games and you go like, well, I hear a lot of great things about this one. I mean, do you recommend people still pick it up even if they haven't played any Resident Evil games?
I think you can enjoy it, but I would if you've never played a Resident Evil game, I would recommend you start with 7 or 2 Remake. I think one of those two is a great place to start. This game depends a lot on being familiar with, at the very least, Leon and what happened in Raccoon City. But because over the course of the game, I mean, there's stuff from 5. There's stuff from 6. There's like this game feels like a cohesive, let's sort of organize the entire timeline of this franchise and make it digestible.
Yeah, this game, it felt like it was made with the purpose of, okay, let's pay tribute to the highs and lows of what came before, but let's also at least somewhat cohesively kind of package the lore of Resident Evil, because it goes insane.
It does. And I honestly think that this game manages to, and in particular with 6, because that's the one that is just the biggest mess that everybody dislikes the most. This game made me feel about 6 the way that Avengers Endgame made me feel about Thor the Dark World.
It all worked out. It all paid off.
It's like, hey, you know what? It wasn't great then, but they, in hindsight, use what narrative elements they can from that experience to go, you know what? I guess I'm kind of glad it happened, because this is able to be what it is because of those mistakes.
Okay. And I guess you guys can give your final thoughts rating, and then you guys can do a spoiler talk there, a little bit of it. Nick, what will be your final thoughts rating for Resident
Oof.
Evil 9?
I'm kind of a very new Resident Evil fan. I only played a little bit of 7, a little bit of 8. I just finished Resident Evil 4 for the first time like a week before I played this. And Requiem is one of my favorite I'll say it right now, it's one of my favorite games that I've ever played. Even
Wow.
from like how tense I was playing through Grace's sections of the games, how great the voice performance is from the lead actress, and just feeling that tension build up throughout all of Grace's section, and then feeling the release of getting to live out my favorite John Wick fantasies as Leon. It is like one of the most entertaining, one of the most well-paced games, and even beyond that, on a story level, for a lore that is as complex and kind of convoluted in a lot of ways as Resident Evil, this manages to, I think, have one of the best written stories in paying tribute to so much of what made this franchise great, and having I think one of the most emotionally well written stories in this franchise. This is like peak gaming. I'm already in the middle of my second playthrough now.
Wow. And how long is this game?
Oh, I played it on casual. I didn't I think I only died like maybe 2 or 3 times, and I think my counter said it took me about 7.5 hours to play
Okay.
through it.
Not bad. That's not that long.
Mm.
Okay. Very good.
And keep in mind too, the counter does not consider cutscenes, deaths, or like time spent in the menus. So I bet you could add an hour or two to that even.
Yeah. All right. High praise from Nick there. What about you there, Sage?
I'm giving it a This Is Cinema. I've played every game in this franchise, and I think it is second place after 4 as the
Mhm.
second best one
Wow.
they've ever done. Whether that's original or remake for 4, either one. I do think this is their second best they've ever been able to pull off. It's like I said, it's a victory lap. They brought this franchise back from the verge of death, and that was almost 10 years ago. That's 2017. They've done a host of great games in that time, and this feels like this victory lap of like, look at what we did, look at where we've been. Even hey, we're gonna make the disappointments even matter. But I think that Grace's voice actress in particular should and probably will be nominated for the best performance category at the Game Awards at the end of this year. I think this will be up for Game of the Year. I think this is a fantastic way to start this year off, and we even get a bit of I kind of can't wait to see where they're going with this next at the end.
Mm. So curious, why isn't it better than 4? What's the thing holding them back from being better than 4?
I think 4 is a little bit more replayable
Mhm.
because of the way its upgrade system works. Here, your upgrade system is smaller. There's not quite as many weapons, and it makes sense because you're only playing as Leon for half the game, and the big upgrades are mostly focused on his character.
Mhm.
But I think with 4, you could get 6 playthroughs deep and just then be maxing out all your upgrades. Here, I think probably 2, maybe 3, you'll be maxing everything out. Again, it's not like a huge difference, I don't think, and this is able to do so much great stuff. It's so close to that same quality. And then I think 4 also has the status of inventing an entire genre of video game to begin with that you can never quite take away from it.
Okay. Wow. So right now, this is your game of the year. Right now, both of you.
It's the front runner for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't game a lot, but yeah, it's Resident Evil. I just finished 4, and that was, I see the hype of why it's considered one of the greatest games of all time, and of course I was going to pick up Resident Evil 9.
Okay. So wow. High peak from Nick for Resident Evil 9, and this is gaming. This is cinema. For Sage there for Resident Evil 9. So this is the spoiler talk right now. Nick and Sage are going to get into it. If you guys haven't finished it or beat it or don't care about it, I guess. It depends, but maybe go back, play it, then come back to this review later on to discuss spoilers. So what are some things spoiler wise that you guys wanted to get into?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is that this, earlier we're talking about Scream 7 and how it's so nostalgia bloated. It just feels empty and hollow. This is that sort of fan service experience done the right way.
Yes.
It earns and organically builds up to these things. And the back half of this game, which I think is primarily where a lot of the stuff is, that's when you're playing as Leon more. That's when you're in Raccoon City. And the sort of way that it uses the environments you're familiar with You know, in some ways they're reusing assets and just kind of changing the way they look a little bit, but
Mhm.
it's genius the way that they move you through this environment. And again, that melancholic feel, just seeing what's become of this place and
Yes,
just the state that it's in.
yeah, basically walking through one of the worst days of Leon's life. Even hearing like elements of the scores, hearing like audio clips from previous games, seeing moments from Resident Evil 2 remake.
Mm.
And this is where it starts to really bring in kind of the full scope of the series because, you know, Umbrella kind of goes down somewhat off screen between Code
Mhm.
Veronica and 4. And then, you know, you have these sort of 4 is this cult that's kind of standalone, it's more of its own
Mhm.
thing. 5 is Albert Wesker, but it's like Umbrella's not really around
Yeah,
anymore, so
it's
he's
like
got a different
Tricell, which
company,
is like which
which
is a
comes up,
completely different company.
which comes up here too,
Yeah,
and ties in in a very interesting way.
yeah, and this kind of like consolidates it all as like the connections, which is like the big shadow organization behind Umbrella, Tricell, and the U.S. government. Because of course, there's another secret lab underneath Raccoon City.
Yeah,
Mm.
so it turns out Jeffrey Epstein was behind Umbrella the entire time. But no, I mean, it's. I think it's genius the way they handle this, and that's one of the things that's They interestingly make 6 relevant in hindsight
Mhm,
because Resident Evil 6 is, you know, it kicks off with the, you know, United States president in that game going like, "I'm going to whistleblow on this big
mhm,
secret about Raccoon City," and then he gets assassinated, and then 6 keeps going like, "Oh, there's this like weird shadow organization that has control of our government," and but then 6 is so messy and it goes in all these
Mm.
different directions and it doesn't evolve its plot very much over its runtime, so you kind of just they bring this idea up and then they don't do anything with it. And
mhm,
then in 7, you know, you have Evelyn as the bioweapon in the house, and near the end of that game they introduce this concept of the connections in
mhm.
some documents, and
Yeah,
they're like, oh, this group made by Evelyn, but they don't talk
and
too
then
much about it
yeah,
there.
and then 8, it revealed that Miranda was behind it and was like one of the inspirations behind Oswald Spencer, who would go on to create the T virus.
And there's even a you get like an Spencer office late in this game
Mhm,
too, and there's a portrait of Miranda in there as well, which ties into Village. And I'd like to point out that the Braille book that
mhm.
the girl Emily is reading in the prison cell in kind of the earlier part of the game is a Braille version of the Book of Shadows from Resident Evil Village's intro.
Mm. So who's that creature that follows you around? Who is
Yeah,
that?
that
Which game
is
are you talking about?
No, in this
in
one.
this game, it's just called the girl, which it's basically implied that in this facility that Grace and Leon investigate, that's run by Victor Gideon. She was one of the like small children that was experimented on and turned into this like ghoul that is stalking you through like more than half of the game. And throughout this, you also rescue this young girl named Emily, who you know because this is Resident Evil, you have a female protagonist. Of course, she bonds with
Yeah.
her, and that is like this overwhelming sense of tension because any educated Resident Evil fan knows what's coming, and the moment where that shoe drops, it's heartbreaking.
It really is. And I don't know, I'm curious, Nick, if you saw these, but there's actually 2 missable extra
Mhm.
cutscenes in that in the care center.
Yeah,
And one of them
I
is if
I
you
saw
go back
one
in
of them.
there. Okay.
Yeah, I saw one
Which
of
one
them when
did
you
you
go
see?
back in there. It's the one where you go back into the room where you hear Emily's story that,
Okay.
they, gave her medicine. It's
Okay,
like,
cool. And then there's the
"Mm."
second one is when you go upstairs the first time and the chunk creature chases you out. If instead of going downstairs, you go into the office, you get an entire extra cutscene with Gideon.
Oh,
Mm.
I got that one on my first playthrough.
Oh, okay, cool. There you go.
Okay. So that's who that is there. Okay. Pretty good. And you said that with this, so there's 2 endings you can do.
Mhm.
What are
Yes.
the 2 endings?
Yeah,
So, oh, go.
so the whole MacGuffin of this game that the connections is trying to get is this, new this new secret virus that's called Elpis, which is supposedly one that's going to make the T virus and all the other bioweapons like irrelevant. It's going to give them like complete control. But the only one who knows the password to it is Grace, because Grace was adopted by Oswald Spencer before, I think it was after the events of the first game.
Hmm.
Yeah, I believe so. It's because I think it's like 2004 when that flashback happens that you see, or something like that. And it's I do have to say it is very funny and kind of classic cartoon supervillain that the connections can't figure this password out because it ends up being the password ends up being hope, right? And there's this whole twist of it's not actually a virus, it's an antidote, and it sort of is the idea is at post this game it's going to wreak economic destruction on this secret shadow society because it makes all virus-based weapons basically irrelevant and not work anymore.
You see like in this like final lab that you explore, you see like ads for different bioweapons. Like you see ones for the liquors for Mr. X that you have a boss fight with, and they're running like 10 million.
There's even like a nemesis that buy your nemesis today. But it's funny that the connections couldn't figure that out because Elpis is the goddess of hope that comes out of Pandora's box, and they never thought, well, what's that name represent? They never just thought.
It's also like a case of you only get one shot at entering the password. So
and I think it also works because they're evil. They just would never consider hope to be the thing that would. And I think that's
the prompt is what does the creator desire?
Yeah. And then there's even a secondary villain thrown in here in the second half that I thought was real fun.
Yeah, Zeno, who is basically just we wish we kept Albert Wesker, but we killed him in 5.
Well, and I think the implication, and because they never outright say it, but I think the implication that they're trying to give is that he is literally a clone because they do showcase this cloning technology that the Connections has access to, like the Emily, and there's these girls being experimented on and all that stuff. And then because there's a few little dialogues like "you are nothing but an imitation" that Gideon says to him at one point, and just the way his powers work, and it is the same voice actor that played Wesker in Resident Evil 4 remake, which is again the remakes are bringing this more concise timeline together for the franchise. I think he is actually supposed to literally be a Wesker clone, and the implication that there's probably a whole bunch more Wesker clones out there.
Okay, interesting. So is it a case like with Resident Evil 7 where it's like really only one ending matters and it's canon and really the other?
Yeah,
yes,
very much so.
I think that's the case, but I'll say this: Resident Evil 7's two different ways of playing out are it's a lot less dynamic. Like if you pick the ending that's not canon, it's only just barely different. Like it doesn't change that much. Here, at least you do get what is a different ending cutscene, even if it's like clearly not going to matter in the next game. So it's a little stronger in that sense of variety, even if it doesn't really count.
Okay. Any other classic characters make a return in this?
There's one big one.
Okay. Who's the big one?
So, in RE4 and, well, actually 6-2, Leon has this woman named Hunnigan over his radio contact, and she's not here anymore. It's been replaced by Sherry Birkin, who is the little girl that you, mostly as Claire, save over the course of Resident Evil 2. And it is the same voice actress that played Sherry Birkin, she's one of the playable characters in 6. So there's another little consistency thread between that game and this.
Okay. And at the very end, during the the final scene, because the lab gets destroyed, Leon and Grace, they both survive. They get they're trapped underground, but they get rescued by the BSAA Hound Wolf squad, which is Chris Redfield's team, and he gets name dropped.
Okay.
And they do, I think an interesting thing is, I think a lot of people did maybe think there were going to be some more returning characters like showing up in the story, and though I could see why, I think it's in the title, Requiem, right? What this game is about is Leon dealing with the survivor's guilt of the people that he couldn't save. So the people that lived, like Claire and Ada,
you don't give a fuck about them.
It makes sense.
Give a fuck about them in this story,
right? It's like it's really not about the people that are still around, and I think it makes sense that hey, maybe the DLC expansions will have some of those because they always kind of go a little wild sometimes with the characters you play as and that stuff. So we'll see how that plays out, but. I think, I think it makes sense the way they handle it. And then there's another returning villain, which I love. And I don't know, Nick, have you played like when you play, like say the 2 remake, have you played a lot of like the bonus modes and kind of side content in those games?
Haven't really, no.
Okay. So there's it's they don't even say the name. There's this character called Hunk who is
Oh yes, I remember Hunk.
he goes
Who's
back to
one of the
Resident
characters,
Evil 2.
and he's one of the characters in one of the playables in Operation Raccoon City.
Yes, he is. And he's basically like there's a boss fight with him, and you know the character's like 70 years old in this game, and Leon and this guy going at it. It's like basically like Batman versus old Deathstroke energy is kind of the vibe it gives off. Like he's supposed to be sort of like the closest thing to a Leon or a Chris Redfield type badass that is like a psychopath that works for Umbrella as an assassin.
Yeah,
And that's
it's
like a big
basically
fan service
doing
moment.
everything but actually saying that it is Hunk, because the character is only called the Commander,
Yeah.
but it's the same voice actor as Hunk. Even
Yeah.
like early in this, you get one of his moves that is his like self kill sequence from Operation Raccoon
Yeah, it's
City.
like the nep snack thing he does.
Mm.
And I don't know if you looked at this too, but if you examine the body after you beat the boss fight, you can see the same black splotches of the Raccoon City syndrome. So he has to have been there, right? So that is even more evidence that it's him. And if you go up, right, and then you come back to that area after the boss,
Oh
his
yeah, he
body's
gone.
So he's not dead either. So that's another reason to be pretty sure it's him. And if you're on insanity difficulty when you do that, there's another group of soldiers there to ambush you. That's not there on other difficulties.
That's sick.
Mm. And you mentioned before the game, you were thinking like this is going to be a swan song to Leon. Did you want him to die in this, or do you think it's fine with him?
I feel like with that we always have this conversation about like what do I want before like playing a game or watching a movie versus what do I really want. And we have that conversation, you know, with writers all the time. Is like, what does the audience want versus what do they really want? And as much as I think it would have been, you know, a good story if they killed Leon, I like the ending we got more.
I agree. I think what they do really works. And because they set up, I think they set up a lot. They set the connections up as these, you know, all
the connections
villains.
The connections up as the like main villains in like a follow-up game. They set up, you know, potentially getting a Resident Evil 5 remake with like a name drop of Tricell.
Yep. And I think that's so much more promising and interesting, and gives us a lot to think about post game. If Leon had died and we'd sort of wrapped his story up there, well, hey, that'd be it. We'd be able to talk about what this game did, and it could have been great, even, you know. But the way that it did play out, we've got stuff to be looking forward to, which ultimately is the more exciting option, I think.
Last question. So what's next with Resident Evil 10? What's
the leaks that we've been getting have been pointing towards Code Veronica as the next remake, which is, I think, a really good thing, because it's another one of those games that I think is like 70% really cool, and then like just a 25% bad game design choices. And I think a remake could really smooth that experience out. And other than Resident Evil 1, Code Veronica is the other major game that Wesker shows up in before he's the main villain in 5. So I think you'd want to build up to a 5 remake with a Code Veronica remake first, so it really fills that timeline in well. That's basically it's basically Claire's sequel the way 4 is Leon's sequel. It's Claire actually continuing the search for her brother, and them coming together, and then a game about the two of them. And then you get some good stuff with Wesker.
grab the fuck, man. Jeez. Okay.
Code Veronica also deals with one of the other kind of founding sources of Umbrella, because you've got Oswald Spencer, he's the big one, James Marcus, who you deal with in Resident Evil 0, and then Code Veronica deals with the Ashford twins, which are the children of Edward Ashford, who's the third sort of founding member. There's a lot of really cool stuff in here. There's some very over-the-top funny stuff going on in this as well. I think this would be a spectacular game to revisit, because I think Claire and Jill both, I do feel like, sometimes get the raw end of the deal with this franchise. I feel like we should get a little bit more. I'm very hopeful that maybe we see some of them in 10. But yeah, Code Veronica remake would be a spectacular next choice. 0's heavily rumored, 5's heavily rumored. I'm sure we're going to be getting a Resident Evil X is probably what it'll be titled, or something like that. But it's the kind of thing where Nakanishi has been driving this series in such a great direction so consistently for so long that I'm kind of down for whatever choice they decide to go with, even if it's like I didn't expect that, but a Resident Evil Outbreak remake, give it to me. I don't even care which one you do.
Okay, interesting. Who would you want to see as the lead? Do you have a preference at all? Who you want to see as the lead character in 10? Or
I mean, it could be anyone, and I would be happy because I really do like all of these characters. But I do think it's time for either Jill or Claire to have a spotlight on them.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, especially because Leon and Chris have kind of gotten the spotlight with, with 4 and 5, with the 2 and 3 remake, and with Chris, you get to play as him in the tail end of Resident Evil Village. It's time for Jill or Claire back.
Okay. Cool. All right. So yeah, you guys praise it a lot. I mean, it's getting critical acclaim all around. Right now it's 88 on Metacritic. A lot of people agree that it's like the second best Resident Evil game behind 4. So that's out there. It's $70 right now. Is it easier to get a physical copy now? Can people get it, or is it still?
I haven't even looked because
I wouldn't even know.
The order that I originally had got delayed to like March 26th, so I canceled it and got the digital version instead. I've heard it's still sold out in a lot of places.
Wow. Okay. So the numbers for this is probably going to be really huge.
Yeah, the sales are already blowing probably anything else out of the water. I did see the previous record for this franchise was Resident Evil 4 Remake at about 122,000 concurrent players on Steam. Resident Evil Requiem has already peaked far higher at a 338,000 concurrent players on Steam. So more than twice what the previous Res record was.
On Wikipedia on March 1st, it peaked at 344,214 players.
So even higher than I read the last time.
Wow. Okay. So this is huge. Yeah. That was Nick and Sage thoughts on Resident Evil Requiem.